Welcome to the Crackin Backs Podcast. Today we have Dr. Brandon Lundell with us, pulling back the curtain on functional medicine. Ever wondered what this buzzword really means and why it's making waves in both chiropractic and medical communities? Dr. Lundell breaks it all down, sharing his unique approach and journey through the secrets behind common nutritional deficiencies and how blood chemistries can actually catch chronic conditions early on. Plus, hear his game-changing approach to managing endocrine disorders that often challenge conventional thinking. Don't miss this chance to learn how you can take control of your health like never before.
We're excited to have Dr. Brandon Lundell on our show today. He's a seasoned expert in functional medicine with over 15 years of experience. And you know what, Doc? I think a lot of people really don't understand the term functional medicine. We hear that a lot now.
Yeah.
And, I honestly don't know if it's a chiropractic term, a medical term, it's an independent term. So just to start to show off, can you just teach us what this term actually means?
Yeah. Functional medicine, kind of my elevator speech for functional medicine is, the term functional medicine is we are more concerned about restoring proper function than we are, treating disease. So the general idea is that dysfunction in organ cells and tissues far precedes disease by years, even decades. And so by restoring optimal function to every cell, to every tissue, to every organ, then disease just simply can't exist because everything is working in harmony and everything is working optimally. So functional medicine is using tools, the best of Western medicine, the best of any kind of medicine, natural medicine, to assess and to make sure that everyone is optimally, fortified. So we look at lab tests and we look at nutrition levels. We look at, is the mitochondria dysfunctional? Is the microbiome dysfunctional? What is the most suboptimal or dysfunctional system that's happening in the body? So that's kind of my elevator speech. To get a little deeper into its origins, it's not really necessarily a chiropractic term, but I do believe that chiropractors make the absolute best functional medicine practitioners. It spans all of the disciplines, medical doctors, DOs, nurse practitioners, PAs are all practicing functional medicine. And it does mean different things to different people, unfortunately. But at its core, the term was coined by Dr. Jeffrey Bland, and he started Metagenics back in the day, and so very nutrition oriented. And he's a PhD, and he brought together a lot of smart medical doctors and chiropractors, and in the late 90s really is when this functional medicine kind of term started to grow and coalesce and congeal into something that ultimately became the Institute of Functional Medicine. I think that's sort of was the earliest version of functional medicine training. It really is more and more becoming an understandable, recognizable term, but we still have a long way to go in making education and making practitioners really standardized and really good at what they do. So it's all over the board, unfortunately, right now.
Yeah. And for those listening, because you'll see MDs in the area saying that they're functional medicine doctors and chiropractors saying functional medicine and acupuncturists. And like you said, everybody under the board.
Yeah.
Is this a special degree that all these doctors are going to taking classes to get a specialty degree, like a chiropractic degree or a MD or a DO? Is this a specialty degree? So if you say you're functional medicine, do you have to have a board certified degree in this?
You do. there's a couple different ways to get certified. In and of itself, you have to practice functional medicine. You have to have a license in some other, discipline, a license to practice. So you can't be licensed solely in functional medicine. So it becomes a sub-discipline of whatever, original license you have. I went through school and I did my chiropractic at Parker, and I also did my acupuncture diplomate as well, and then I went to naturopathic school as well. So all of that got me the foundation, but I still needed some extra functional medicine specific training. And there's a lot of different terms. It could be back in the day before functional medicine became really popular, it was holistic medicine or integrative medicine. So there's a lot of cross terms that mean very similar things. And ultimately, it's really looking at the true causes and cores of illness and dysfunction, and not just throw in a medication or even herbs. It's a lot of naturopathic training is you have a sore throat. Okay, well, what herb is going to help with a sore throat? And that's great, but that's not functional medicine. Functional medicine really is, okay, asking deeper questions. Well, why did you get sick in the first place? Is there something wrong with your immune system? Is there some deficiency there, or are you more stressed than you should be? Right. So it's getting a lot deeper than saying, well, take some cat's claw and you're good. That's great. And that certainly is better than taking an antibiotic in most cases, but it's still not functional medicine in the true essence of the word. And those of us that have been practicing it and teaching it like I do, that's the real essence of functional medicine.
That's great, because we see terms start out one way and they get thrown into another category. Holistic used to be a medical term, then it became a chiropractic term, and so I think every couple of years, and then the public trying to keep up with all this terminology is got to be so confusing. What inspired your journey into the functional medicine with all your backgrounds and what you said, and have you seen it evolve with these terms changing, the confusion happening? How do you see it evolve over these last years, and blending the Western and natural and Eastern? How do you see it evolving over the last couple of years?
Yeah, well, first question, how I got into it. I think like a lot of people, I had a very personal experience. I graduated college and took a year off and traveled. Thought I was going to go into law school, and the universe had other plans. I was working in a bookstore. I was working at a very large bookstore in Denver called the Tattered Cover, and really huge bookstore back then. Books were more, bookstores were able to make it back then.
Right.
And I started having my own health issues and becoming more aware that, gosh, I didn't feel good when I ate this, or, I feel anxious today. What happened? So, I've always been an athlete, so I've always asked that question of like, hey, what can I do to optimize my health? But my body was definitely undergoing some changes. So I read a book. I picked up a book at the bookstore called Eating Alive, and written by a naturopath up in Canada. And he started talking about in the book Candida, and how when you eat certain things, you feed Candida, and the Candida gets in, secretes things that get into the rest of you. I mean, this is back in the, late 90s, early 2000s when these weren't household terms like they are now. And it really was like a light bulb. It really was an epiphany. I remember reading the book going, I want to know how the body really works. I want to know everything there is to know about how the cell functions. And when you feel a certain way, there's got to be a reason. What is that reason? I mean, it's there. It's got to be a scientific factual thing, or an energetic factual thing. It's there. So that started me off on the journey. And I looked at chiropractic schools. I looked at naturopathic schools. I even looked at medical schools. And ultimately, I met a chiropractor who was doing, this kind of holistic medicine. He was he was an AK doc, and he was doing muscle testing, and he was doing this Vega machine, which tested your energy and your systems and your organs. And he was doing acupuncture, and he also did chiropractic. And he treated the whole body, truly the holistic medicine. He treated the whole body in whatever method and tools he had, and what was needed. And it really was like, yes, this is it. This is what I want to do. So I went to chiropractic school, and I often laugh because I say that, I actually paid attention in biochemistry because I knew this is what I wanted to do. A lot of us in chiropractic school, we just got through biochemistry, and we got through okay. I don't know if I'm going to actually need this in my practice, but I loved it. I actually scored the highest possible score in pathology in boards 1. And so, and I went to the Colorado Chiropractic College. I don't know if you guys remember this. It was a brief college in
Wow.
Denver. And it was amazing. We had medical doctors as staff. It was designed to be a truly integrative chiropractic program, which was perfect. And I'm from the Denver area. So we had a great education the first 2 years, and then 9/11 happened, and the school was owned by the University of Tokyo, and I think they got freaked out and they pulled out, and it was then I transferred to Parker. But it's too bad. We almost had a really cool, we did grand rounds at the University of Colorado hospital. Like, it was really cool. It was really integrative. Yeah.
That's awesome.
And I remember in my second year, we were doing a neurology grand rounds, and we were side by side with the medical students, and the doctor was asking questions about, aphasia and things like that. And all of the chiropractic students, we had the answer like that. And at the end of it, he's like, "What school are you guys from?" And we're like, "We're from chiropractic school." And he's like, "I can't believe it. You guys are smarter than most, second year medical students." So
wow,
it was, we do get a lot more neurology, I think, in our classes. And so that's one of the reasons why I think chiropractors do make the best holistic practitioners and functional medicine practitioners, because we truly treat the whole body, right? That's
Right.
ingrained in us from day one. And we have tools, chiropractic, and those tools that a medical doctor or a PA, just can't have. And I don't know about you, but I love in my practice when we get the biochemistry balanced out, and I like to do that first. Then when we start to do the adjustments, that's like everything. It makes everything come together. The body, the lymph system, the immune system, the gastrointestinal system, the nervous system, chiropractic kind of just brings all of that together. And without functional medicine, I believe that, chiropractic is less effective, much less effective, because the old saying goes, you can't adjust your way out of a B12 deficiency, right? No matter how many adjustments you make, you're not going to absorb more B12. You might increase vagal nerve function, which can help absorption and digestion. So I get that. But yeah, it really does meld very, very well together. So if any chiropractors are out there wondering about how do I add functional medicine to my practice, it's really simpler than you think. It does take a little bit of education and takes a little bit more time running blood work and going over the labs with the patient. But man, when you really see a patient come and do the blood work, and you explain it to them, they're like, this is why I'm not feeling so good. This is why I've been suffering with chronic fatigue for 15 years, or with autoimmune disease, or with, just brain fog, or, whatever it is. And you help it make sense, for them. And they're like, "Oh yeah, this makes total sense." And they're on board, they become a lifetime patient.
Brendan, I want to really connect with the audience that are not doctors and go through some clinical conversation with you, and add some specifics to, nutritional deficiencies and conditions that any of us that are listening or watching can relate to something. So what are some of the most common conditions and deficiencies you see, and how would you treat them?
Well, let me just jump right into kind of what I believe is um, the crux of most diseases, which is the mitochondria. The mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell, and it produces energy. It produces ATP. It allows our genes to function. It allows the every tissue and organ to communicate with each other. So we truly live in a world that is very destructive to our mitochondria, from day one, from electromagnetic frequencies and stress and nutritional deficiencies, and then our poor diet and inflammation and sugar in our diet. Like the mitochondria ultimately takes the big hit, and it gets expressed differently in different tissues. When your mitochondria starts to fail, in your brain, you start to get brain fog, and you just don't feel yourself, and you can get mood disorders, you can get depression, you can get anxiety. When it's in the gut, you get bloating, and you get constipation, diarrhea, or you just don't feel well. You don't feel like you're absorbing well. When it affects your muscular system, you just feel tired all the time. When it affects your immune system, you can get autoimmune. And so a lot of what we do is assessing your mitochondrial function. And really, that comes down to just a couple things. One, something called leaky gut affects the mitochondria. And we've all heard leaky gut, unless you've been under a rock for the last 10 years. But that has become really, really an important term, and it's a misunderstood term. But I think the idea that people get about leaky gut is when you don't eat well and you have bad bacteria, things start leaking into your gut that shouldn't be there. Bacterial byproducts and undigested food particles and the chemicals in our food, they start leaking into our systemic immune body, not just our liver, but our systemic blood, and crosses the blood-brain barrier, and that's really all those toxins and chemicals damage the mitochondria, damage our cells, and it can cause hormonal problems. It can cause infertility. It even contributes to things like autism. A big passion of mine is that if we want to be healthy, we have to start out healthy, right? We can't start behind the curve when we're born. And so there's a discipline called preconception planning, right? Or preconception health. And the idea is getting a mom and a dad as healthy as possible has proven to make that baby healthier throughout the baby's lifespan, no matter what happens postnatally. It's that months before and during conception that determine so much about your genes and so much about how that baby is going to function for the rest of that baby's life. So the scientific discipline is called the developmental origins of health and disease. So how your childhood and adult health is pre-programmed in the womb. So that's a big passion of mine, and we have to continue that conversation. That's a conversation that I think a lot of people don't understand, that, hey, how you feel right now, whether you're 20 or 30 or 40 or 60, actually had a lot to do with what happened in the womb. Doesn't mean that you can't change it and you can't, mitigate it. But let's not have our kids start off 10 steps behind the curve, and trying to play catch up, and fighting things like asthma and allergies and ADD and autism and mood disorders and eating disorders and addiction. Let's not have them pre-programmed and set up for those things. Let's have them pre-programmed and set up for health and vitality and happiness. And so it's pretty simple. It's really going through a functional medicine program and addressing any areas of imbalance. Back to the mitochondria, which also affects preconception health. The main way to protect the mitochondria and to support the mitochondria are good quality B vitamins and antioxidants, things like N-acetylcysteine, green tea extract, grapefruit seed extract, alpha lipoic acid. glutathione precursors. These are the things that help your mitochondria repair and rebuild. But it is different for everybody. So any of listeners out there who want to go through a functional medicine program, just make sure that practitioner really is versed in assessing your labs and not just throwing supplements at you, but what does your body really, really, really need? So that mitochondrial health, as I've been doing this for almost 20 years now, it really does. All roads lead to, in some form or another, how to support your mitochondria.
We would like to thank Stark Roast for making the best organic coffee and supporting our efforts to keep you healthy and happy. Click on the link to start enjoying your fresh roast today.
I'd like to further qualify something you mentioned earlier and how profound it is. And you're the first person that we've had on any of our shows that has mentioned kind of prepping for the conception, which I strongly believe that people should prep before surgery or any kind of procedure as well and get the maximum health. But it's very interesting that you said this, because my former wife and mother of my two boys, my first boy, she did not have any chocolate through all her 9 months.
Yeah.
That child, my son Hunter, hates chocolate, avoids it like the plague. What kid hates chocolate?
Right.
The second child, we got cocky, she had her chocolate and loved it and all that. That kid can't get enough chocolate. So,
exactly.
So we thought, oh my God, he's going to have juvenile diabetes before.
Right.
So I think what you're saying is profound, and it means it was worth repeating, but in a more dynamic
that's great
storyline. So
it's true. And imagine that being repeated tens of thousands of times on your genetics. So the things that moms and dads do before birth and during gestation, before conception and during gestation, leave permanent marks on the genes. This is a discipline called epigenetics. It's the factors above and beyond the genetic code, right? When you're conceived, you get the genetic code from your mom and your dad. You really can't do much about that. By the way, you get most of your genetic code for your mitochondria from your mom. The mitochondria actually has its own DNA and its own code, and that actually comes more from the mom than from the dad. But when this term epigenetics, the things that you eat absolutely do program. There was a researcher called Chatzi in Spain, and they did University of Spain. They did probably 10 to 15. We're going into the 20th year now, where they looked at the mother's diet, and then they looked at fetal outcomes. All else being the same, mother's weight and socioeconomic class and all that stuff. When the mother adhered to a strict kind of Mediterranean type of diet, lots of vegetables, no junk food, good clean proteins, good clean carbohydrates, good clean fats, the babies had almost no eczema, up to their 20th year now. Like we're saying, we're in the 20th year of following these kids and correlating it with diet. And so the kids, though, that were born of moms who ate more junk food, more dairy was a big factor. So if the mom ate a lot of dairy, the kids were more likely to have asthma and autism and ADD and eczema and those things. So just what the mom eats during birth. Guess what? Here's the real kicker. Postnatal diet had no effect in terms of the outcomes. It had I shouldn't say no effect, but it had a lot less effect. What was done in the womb was by far more predictive than postnatal diets and postnatal factors. So as I said in the beginning, it's not too late, because a lot of people hear this and they're like, oh it's too late for me. I mean, my mom was like, who knows? She ate McDonald's every day. Maybe that explains. it's not too late. It's never too late. It just means that you're probably going to have to work a little bit harder, to overcome some of those things. But yes, chocolate or vegetables. It even actually comes down to thoughts. I don't want to talk the whole time, but there's this really, really cool study that highlights the epigenetic factor. So I'm going to try to explain it. It's a little bit complicated, but imagine mice, okay? And what they did was they knocked out a serotonin gene, right? So when you knock out a serotonin gene, it makes the mice more anxious, just like humans too. If the serotonin systems aren't functioning properly, right? That's why so many people are on SSRIs, because the serotonin systems have become abnormal. That's a whole different conversation of why. But functional medicine can treat that too without drugs and medications. But so they would take one mouse that we call that a wild type mouse that doesn't have the knockout gene. Okay, we take a wild type mouse. Now, what they did was all of these wild type mice that don't have the knockout gene, they actually took their embryos, okay, and replanted it into different. They replanted it into the mouse that had the knockout gene. Okay, so the mouse did not have the embryo, we'll say, was not genetically programmed for anxiety at all. It did not have the gene for anxiety. When it was gestated in the wild type mouse, no problem. The baby was, the mouse was born, and it was normal and healthy and smart. Well, as smart as those mice could be, right? But then when the wild type mouse, the genetically pure mouse, if you will, was transplanted into an anxious, serotonin knockout mouse mom. What do you think the baby was born? Do you think the baby was born expressing its genetic, inheritance, or expressing more anxiety? It was actually expressing more anxiety, just like the mouse that had the knockout gene. So the factors, because the mouse was stressed and secreting chemicals of stress, that actually crossed the placental barrier and programmed that pure, if you will, genetically more pure mouse to have those traits. So just like you were saying, the chocolate, you're not crazy. That is exactly, what happens. And so I know that puts a lot of pressure and a lot of stress sometimes on mothers. Fathers don't get a free pass either, because they actually have to start earlier. Our sperm, the sperm that gets ejaculated usually starts being produced 6 months before we actually ejaculate it. So alcohol in the father has been shown to predict things like autism. If the father is drinking more alcohol for 6 months before before conception, if the father exercises more, that's a better outcome for the baby, because we are epigenetically programming our sperm for those 6 months before conception. So I like to have people give me about 6 months before they really start conceiving, especially if they've had problems conceiving. Half of all infertility issues come from the father, not just the mother. So the sperm has these marks, these DNA marks, and we can actually test that in sperm. How damaged is your sperm? Not just your sperm count and your sperm motility, but how damaged is that DNA? Are the chromosomes normal? Are the chromosomes slightly abnormal? And there are simple things you can do: changing your diet, eliminating alcohol, eliminating sugar, fixing your microbiome, and doing antioxidants like CoQ10 and acetylcysteine. Man, that makes a huge difference. So yeah, I love this topic, because if we want our species to survive and thrive, we really need to start turning this thing around. So
that is fantastic. Thank you. Let me ask you, I'm not sure if you get a lot of client or patients from out of state or different locations, or even in telemedicine, if you do telemedicine. But do you notice deficiencies being geographical or national,
Oh, that's a great,
nationality?
yeah, that's a great question. I do treat, patients, in other states, even in other countries. And well, let me start more globally, and then I'll start going more locally. But
Okay.
globally, yeah, it's interesting. You know, some cultures are much healthier that I have noticed than Americans. That's not groundbreaking news by any means, but it is interesting. England tends to have a lot of similar diseases than us, whereas Denmark and Switzerland, they tend to be healthier. Australia tends to be a little bit healthier, although as they're adopting more and more Western diet, that's not the case, but yeah, I find that different parts of the world do have more health issues. So as we get to the United States, I find that living in more urban areas does come with more potential health problems, and I think that is maybe access to more processed foods, and more toxins, more pollutants, and that's a huge, also that back to the preconception, but that's the other thing. We have all these endocrine disruptors that are swimming around, and we can't see them, we can't touch them, smell them, taste them, so we think that they don't exist, but they do. And they're everywhere. They are everywhere. Phthalates in your deodorant or in your, cologne, stuff that's impregnated in our shirts and in our clothes to be anti deodorant, or anti, sweating, and clothes are actually a big part of. If you ever buy athletic wear, a lot of it is impregnated with chemicals to keep it from smelling. And Under Armour has a lot of that stuff, and they don't tell you, but if you see that it says anti-odorant or anything like that, then that there's probably some chemicals in there. But packaged foods and microplastics. Here's a little fun fact: the average person in this country, anyway, eats a credit card's worth of plastic every week. Now that certainly can be debatable scientifically. I mean, this was studies that came out of the Environmental Working Group and other, the University of Australia did these studies. And, whether you agree with that ultimate, that's 5 grams of plastic, everyone can agree we are getting microplastics. We can't, that is in everybody's blood. When we do studies, microplastics are in blood, and those microplastics break down and they are really hard to remove from your system. And, we're not talking about tiny shards of plastic. We're talking about, the actual chemicals of plastic getting into your system and getting into each cell and passing through the cell membrane. And it does damage the mitochondria. It does damage the endocrine system. So, that's a huge cause of low testosterone, for males throughout the lifespan. There's a really good book called Countdown by a PhD researcher called Shauna Swan. Her name's Shauna Swan. And she highlights how most of the endocrine disruptors, most of the chemicals we have and are exposed to, 90% of them are either proestrogenic and or anti-androgenic. So males really get a lot of the brunt of this chemical world. And so this is why autism is 5-to-1 male to female, because these endocrine disruptors get into the system and disrupts how testosterone is supposed to develop the male brain. Females require testosterone as well for development, so they have more issues too, more metabolic issues typically. It really affects. So she measures testosterone exposure in utero through something called the anogenital distance, right? It's the distance between the anus and the genitals in newborns. And you can predict how fertile that baby is going to be based on that anogenital distance. And so, and I'm sure you guys have heard that right now, males, a 20-year-old male sperm count is the same right now as a 65-year-old 50 years ago.
I heard this.
Yeah.
It's the same as a 65-year-old 50 to 60 years ago. And so, it is that there's a lot of things we can do, to change this. It's never too late, but I think getting this information out is is really, really important. So, and all the male listeners out there who are like, why at 30 did I test for low testosterone? And I see this all the time in my patients. And then medicine has no other tool. They're like, well, here's some testosterone for you. All right, you might feel better, but first of all, it's not functional medicine. Functional medicine asks why? Why do you have low testosterone? Why do your testes not work? Let's figure that out, and let's work with that. And why do your receptors on your cell not work? Let's work with those issues. And at least in my practice, 98% of cases, we're able to restore normal, healthy amounts of testosterone. But man, it can take a while. No matter what age you are, it can take 3, 6, 9 months, and so a lot of people don't want to wait that long, right? So they're like, yeah, just give me the testosterone shot. That's great. But if anyone has ever done that, they can tell you they feel great in the beginning, and then they're right back to where they were or worse, 6 months or a year later, because the problem didn't get fixed. And then you actually become testosterone resistant. You become resistant to the testosterone, just like you become resistant to insulin, because your body is now swimming in it. There's too much, and the body will become resistant to it. So pretty fascinating.
So you raise an interesting question. I mean, we hear more and more about this, about transgender issues, or however you want to refer to it as. I'm not quite sure, but what you were saying about how hormone levels are changing in men, in boys, and in females, and a lot of it is chemically related to the food or the things they wear or the lotions and so on.
Yep.
Do you think that is having? I always am wondering: is that having an effect, or we're just seeing it more because of internet access and how we're exposed to it more?
Yeah. Well, this is definitely sort of a chopping block kind of question. I want to tread lightly, right? Because we want to be careful not to pathologize, transgender issues and say, oh yeah, it's bad because of the environmental. I want to be careful not to say, yeah, it's because of some kind of pathology and therefore it's abnormal and bad. I don't think that is what we're saying, and that's not the point of the conversation. But when we look at the scientific literature and the body of scientific literature, we do see that these endocrine disruptors absolutely affect our our development, our sex development. And so I think that however you accept it, we have to accept it, and we have to understand that this is a part of our modern world. But when we look at other species, for example, we see the same things happening, and we have seen the same things happening for about 70 years now, since the advent of our chemical world. Silent Spring by Rachel Carlson was written in the 60s. She was a PhD researcher. Actually, no, she was just some random person's housewife, I think. And then she started doing all this research. about how these endocrine disruptors are affecting other species. So in frogs, in amphibians, crocodiles have been studied, in birds, we do see more ambiguous genitalia. We do see actually in other species their ability to switch back and forth, like frogs can switch back and forth between males and females depending on the environmental cues. So not pathologizing, but just understanding that we do live in an endocrine disrupting world, and we can't bury our heads and say it doesn't exist, and we can't pretend that it's not having an effect. So it is having an effect, and it has an effect both on our fertility as well as our hormone production, which can then certainly lead to maybe some gender identity issues or confusion, or it can at the very least just make it more pronounced, even if that was still going to happen. I think back to your question, I think it's also a combination of like they say this with autism. Well, is autism really increasing, or are we just becoming more aware of it and diagnosing it more? Well, maybe a little bit of both, but there's no doubt that we're having a dramatic increase in autism, and it keeps increasing. So whether we're talking about neurodevelopment, again, not to pathologize, but as a scientist, isn't it okay to ask why are we seeing, doesn't mean that these kids, whether they're dealing with transgender issues or whether they're dealing with, autism, they all deserve to be honored and loved and cared for and supported. But as a scientist and a researcher and a clinician, what is happening to our environment? What is contributing to the rise in all of these things? Because I have a friend who's, who's going through a lot of that, and at that point, the point isn't, okay, we want to, tease out the pathology and fix you, right? That's not what we're trying to do at all. But how can we support you? How can we make this an easier transition and remove the other ill effects of these endocrine disruptors, and just making people as healthy as possible? One of my favorite books that really, just like Eating Alive, changed the course of my career. This book changed the course of my practice, and I read it in 2012. It's called Our Stolen Future, and it's written by 4 PhD MD researchers on endocrine disrupting chemicals, one of whom has actually become a really good friend of mine, Fred Vom Saal, because I met him actually at an environmental medicine conference. Environmental medicine is the study of our environment and how it affects our body, and chemicals and EMFs and those kinds of things. But I, in doing my research and developing my lectures and my functional medicine program that I teach, I kept coming across this guy's name, Fred Vom Saal. He was doing 20 some years ago, he was doing research on BPA, right, which we all know is a bad endocrine disruptor. He was doing the same thing that researchers did with diet. He was saying, okay, let's measure the levels of BPA in mother's urine when they're pregnant, and then let's follow, and now it's in its 25th year now, let's follow the offspring and see if we can see trends. The mothers who had higher BPA in their urine, the offspring were more likely to be obese and overweight.
BPA, for the lay audience, is, go ahead.
BPA is bisphenol A. Bisphenols are used in all plastics, all packaging. It's used in even lotions. It's used anytime you see plastic. And so when I was talking about microplastics earlier, these are the chemicals that are in our body. Now, I'd like to say, we see a lot of BPA free now, right? This water bottle is BPA free, or this container is BPA free. Well, unfortunately, that doesn't guarantee that it's safe, because what they use are what we call in environmental medicine regrettable substitutions, right? They substitute it with unfortunate, regrettable, so BPF or BPS, which are actually less studied. And now, as the research is coming out, they're more harmful, because we live in a world in the United States. This actually started with Carnegie and Rockefeller. As they started developing chemicals, they lobbied and they developed laws that protected them from any harm that came to them. So we still are the inheritance of those laws that say the onus of proof is on the consumer to say that this is dangerous. The onus of proof is not on the manufacturer to say that this is safe. So there are no laws and regulations about that require companies to prove any true measure of safety before it's released on the public. So, there are laws that kind of, can come back and say, if you knew that this was harmful and you still released it to the public, then they can get in trouble, which is actually what happened with glyphosate, and the other ingredients that they put in Roundup. It's like, okay, you knew that some of these were harmful, you still put it in your product, so you are liable. But the onus of proof is on us, and who has millions and billions of dollars to fight these huge multinational corporations to say this is unsafe? So, obviously no one's going to put out a product that is going to kill somebody within a few days, right? I mean, right? So they're very subtle in what they're doing. But these chemicals now, rather than just producing cancer within a few years, I mean, they make sure that that's not going to happen as much, although it still does. But it's the endocrine disrupting and neurological disrupting research that has just barely become a conversation within EPA, within the government, within the manufacturing and chemical industry. They've never had to prove or even worry about long-term effects of these chemicals. And so BPA is one that has been studied a lot, and we know how detrimental it is, but there are so many other chemicals out there that we have to be aware of. Actually, my friend Fred Vom Saal and MD Ali Cohen, who has a Smart Human podcast, right? Because it does affect our IQ. They wrote a book, Living Toxin Free in a Chemical World. So that by Ali Cohen and Fred Vom Saal. There's another book by Leah Segedi called Green Enough. So, we don't want to drive ourselves crazy. Nobody wants to be that person. I am that person. When I walk into a party, I'm like, I'm not eating that because it's got these chemicals, and I'm not eating that. I'm not the most popular guy although a lot of people end up asking me a bunch of questions about it. But carpets that sprayed with stain guard, like I'm not going to walk on that. I'm like, if you're going to tell me to take my shoes off and you want me to walk on I'm just going to stay on the wood floor. Thank you. By the way, what is your wood floor covered with? What do you clean with? Household cleaners are a huge, it's not the funnest thing to know all of these. And I tend to drive my patients and my close family a little bit crazy, but it is the truth. It is the truth. I try to, the good news is you don't have to live in a bubble. There are ways to mitigate it. So if I'm going to walk around on carpet, I teach, I go a lot around the country, and I'm in, I have to be on planes and I have to be in hotels and all that stuff. I can make my environment as healthy and safe as possible, but I still have to live in the world. So there are things that you do. And this is why I take supplements. This is why I eat really well. This is why I exercise. If you take good care of yourself, the human body is resilient. If it gets what it needs, if it gets, the support that it needs and the nutrition that it needs, we can handle some of these things. It's not about, it's not an all or nothing principle. It's just mitigating where you can and being as healthy as you can to withstand all of these hits that we take on a daily basis.
So I understand that you don't get invited to many parties.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, don't invite that guy.
I ultimately have to end up hosting my own parties. I come to my, because they don't know that I've taken all these pains to make my house very healthy.
Right.
So I do have people that come in all the time because I have air purifiers going in the background, and I have people that come. And I've actually had friends tell me like, why I feel like I can breathe so much easier in your house. Why? What is that? And sure enough, I'm like, well, we've got air purifiers and we use cleaners that don't irritate the pulmonary system.
Nice.
So, yeah.
So you mentioned earlier about autism, and I just want to stake a claim. And what we're realizing is that yes, the incidence and finding of autism in children has increased, yet the testing has stayed the same. So people think, oh, well, we've created more acute ways of figuring out, that they're on a scale. But no, You're absolutely right. The testing has stayed the same, at least for the last 10 to 15 years, but we're seeing it more and more, and it's a little scary. So I want to get into asking you about, for those of us, doctors and patients that are listening, what are key lab workups that you would routinely ask for as a, basis for your, discovery?
Yeah.
Obviously there's ones that are a lot more specific, but generally speaking, because I get asked all the time by lay people, well, what should I ask my doctor to do?
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't know if I'm able to do this, but people can certainly contact my office. I can give them a list of labs that I have. I won't see a patient without these set of labs, and you can get it at any major hospital or LabCorp, Quest. You have to have a doctor's order, and I do this for people all over the country. But it does, when you go to your traditional PCP, your traditional medical provider, they may run what I call the malpractice panel, meaning that it should be malpractice to run these small little tests and then give you a clean bill of health, right? That's like kicking your tire before you start your car and be like, yep, it's good, we're going. I'm a pilot and I've been a pilot since I was a kid and I fly airplanes in my limited spare time. But we have a saying of someone who is really lazy, a pilot who's really lazy, and we say, kick the tires, light the fires. Like that's their pre-flight inspection, right? Instead of checking the gas and checking, all of don't worry, that's not how I fly. But we have these, people who just do this really cursory checkup, and that's kind of going to your PCP provider. So if you get your liver enzymes and you get your kidney enzymes checked and you get your cholesterol and you get your just checking to make sure you're not anemic, that's good. Okay, that is what we call the disease model. Lab tests are designed in traditional medicine to catch disease. They are not designed to assess optimal function. So we have to expand those labs and change the lab ranges, by the way, because the lab ranges are designed to only catch something when you're in a disease state. So, for instance, fasting blood sugar is a common one that everyone tests. The normal range is, 65 to 99. If you got a 98 score, every medical doctor in the country will be like, good job, or wouldn't mention it because you're within the normal range. Well, actually, when we look at large studies, millions of people, data points, we see that for every point above 85, you actually have a 6% increase of developing diabetes. So at 98, right, you're basically at a 75 to 80% chance of developing diabetes within the next 5 years, right? 5 to 10 years, if you didn't do anything, right? And so we have more tools. We have like continuous glucose monitors, but even then, the ranges. So all of the listeners out there, remember, even if you get a good blood work, you have to look at different ranges, not the disease model ranges, but the optimal function ranges. And I've written a textbook, a reference manual on optimal ranges. So people can take their blood work and say, hey, am I optimal? And if not, why? What might be happening? So assessing glucose, assessing a marker called hemoglobin A1C, which is traditionally only done for diabetics. And again, that's like saying, well, I'll give you breaks once you hit the brick wall, right? That's not helpful. So hemoglobin A1C, same thing. Most people are insulin resistant, or what we call pre-diabetic. I actually don't like the term pre-diabetic because it implies that you're fine. You're pre-disease. You're just, you're getting a little close, right? No, you have a disease process. You have a dysfunction, which is insulin resistance, which can lead to not only heart disease, but it's the major contributing factor in Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, dementia, and studies show if your hemoglobin A1C is high in your 30s, you're more likely to have dementia in your 60s and 70s. So it's what you do when you're younger, not just what you do when you're older. So I would say assessing your blood sugar through fasting blood sugars and through hemoglobin A1C. The other marker that almost no one does in the traditional medical field is a marker called homocysteine. We do other things too, vitamin D, getting your vitamin D checked and your full thyroid panel and getting some inflammatory markers like CRP. So if, all of those are important, but I want to spend the few minutes we have left on homocysteine because I think it's the books have been written on it and it has been called the greatest single indicator, not only indicator, but the greatest single indicator of whether you are likely to live long or die young, and how well you live. So homocysteine has traditionally been thought to be just a cardiovascular disease marker, and it is not. It is one of the most important markers in a biological process called methylation, right? A podcast on functional medicine would not do functional medicine justice if I didn't talk about methylation. Methylation is the second largest biochemical reaction we have in the body. And not to get down the weeds in the biochemistry of it, but we need methylation to do everything in the body, to process hormones, to make proteins, to turn on and off genes, right? So cancer genes need to be turned off by the methyl groups. And so homocysteine, if it's elevated above an 8 or 9 in most people, means that you're not methylating very well. And I just want to say that having a normal homocysteine doesn't guarantee that you're methylating really well, but methylation is supported by, really the only way to support methylation is to take pre-methylated B vitamins, okay? Pre-methylated B12, pre-methylated folic acid, activated B5. So taking a multivitamin might be enough for some people if they have pre-methylated forms. Most multivitamins over the counter don't. So you have to see that methylcobalamin, that methyl group, or methylfolate. You have to see that methyl group in there. But a lot of people, about 60% of Caucasians, need even more support. And this also goes back to preconception. This is that methylation is so important in reversing the autism and even schizophrenia and all that stuff. So supporting autism becomes a key biochemical marker and process in that. So anyone who wants to get that blood work, you do need to see a functional medicine practitioner typically, because if you go to your doctor and you say, I'd like homocysteine, they're like, well, why? You didn't have a heart attack, because maybe they heard about it in board, maybe they remember that from boards exams and when they went to school, but they certainly don't practice with it, and they certainly don't know what to do about it if it's high.
Do I understand correctly from what I've heard or read in the past about B12, that your typical B12 is cyanobalamin, and cyan, it's not a good thing to be taking.
Right, exactly, yeah.
But how it's been around for so many years, and it's injectables, and people think that's the greatest thing, B12. Oh, I'm going to get a B12 shot. But now you're talking about having methylated.
Either methylated or hydroxylated, so hydroxy B12 or methyl B12. Cyanocobalamin is a synthetic form. It is not natural in the body. The body only has 3 forms of B12 that it uses in the body. Methylcobalamin is the first. It's 80% of our body's B12 needs to be in the form of methylcobalamin in order to be used. The second form is hydroxy, and the third form is adenosylcobalamin. So cobalamin is the technical term for B12. So when you take cheap Centrum, right, from Costco, you're getting cyanocobalamin. Now, yes, the cyano is the same component in cyanide. It is a heavy metal. So yes, it is something that can be dangerous. But the most dangerous part of it really is that it contains so little of the actual cyano part of it, but it is the fact that your body has to use other methyl groups in order to activate that B12. And so you actually can develop a methylation deficiency by taking cyanocobalamin, and same is true with folic acid. The body has to methylate it. And if you're taking a folic acid that is, your bread or your cereals or other things that's fortified with just regular folic acid, that's synthetic. The body doesn't use that, and it has to rob other methyl groups in the body in order to make that folic acid usable. And so you end up creating a methylation deficiency potentially. And that's so true. But now we do have more access to pre-methylated vitamins and B12 shots. But back to that, so many people do need B12 because it is the only B vitamin that our gut has to actively absorb, meaning our gut has to secrete a chemical in order to absorb it. All the other B vitamins, they get absorbed, passively by itself. But B12, we have to secrete something called intrinsic factor, and a lot of people don't secrete intrinsic factor, especially if you have a bad diet. And guess what else? I hate to say this, but alcohol also stops and inhibits the absorption of B6 and B12. And so a lot of people end up developing methylation deficiencies because of their dietary and lifestyle habits. So that's how we treat it.
Outstanding. In fact, I'm sure you have tons more information. We've maxed out on our time, and we could probably go on for another couple hours. It was so good.
Totally.
And very, very, it was very, very, very helpful, even what we had covered. So you do telemedicine, yes?
I do telemedicine. Yep.
I may become your client, and my mother and my other friends and everything.
Totally.
It was very comprehensive, and there's things that I found on my blood work that have been managed before, but I like what you're providing here. Thank you so much for being on the show. Really.
Yeah, you're very welcome. Thank you very much. And if you can just go to my website, Dr. Brandon Lundell, and you can, we'll be happy to start running some blood work and seeing where you're at. And if any of the listeners want to do that too, we love to do that. So thank you again for having me. it's a ton of fun talking about this, and I'm so interested and so glad that you guys are interested in it. So thank you again.
Doc, you were great, and I'll put all that stuff in the description of your show, so make it really easy for people to find you. So we really appreciate your time and your effort. This was fantastic.
Yeah, thank you very much, guys, and let's do it again.
You got it, man.
All right.
Love it. Take care, buddy.
See you guys.
Thank you for listening to today's episode of the Crackin Backs Podcast. We hope you enjoyed it. Make sure you follow us on Instagram at Crackin Backs Podcast. Catch new episodes every Monday. See you next time.